Welcome to a webinar on tips for explaining work incentives. There are several learning objectives for this webinar. First, to be able to understand the importance of focusing on the bottom line, on helping people focus on how much money they're going to end up with rather than just on keeping all benefits at all costs. In other words, you want to make sure people focus on how they can financially benefit from work, even if certain benefits are reduced or even stop. You want to understand some basic points about work incentives, about the logic of SSI work incentives, and the logic of Title II work incentives. Want to know how to use visuals and comparisons to explain work incentives to people, particularly those who are more visual learners. Want to be able to understand the potential advantages of a person working their way off Title II benefits, and explain your role as a benefit navigator or benefit planner regarding explaining work incentives to people. So starting with focusing on the bottom line, as you've already learned, the work incentives in the Title II and SSI programs help protect benefits when people work, either cash or medical benefits or both. But when you're explaining work incentives, you don't want your focus to be on helping people just preserve all benefits they receive. If they're capable of thinking beyond that, although admittedly, some people are just so nervous about the possibility of having any benefits lost that they can't even focus on work unless you can guarantee that nothing will happen to their cash or medical benefits if they do work. But for others, particularly people you've developed relationships with who've come to trust you, as well as others who just are not as wedded to benefits as some other people are. If you focus on their bottom line, on their net income, and show them that if they can earn enough, they could be better off even having certain benefits reduced or stopped, that's where you want your focus to be. You want to help people improve their overall financial situation, not just keep benefits. For many people, working and increasing their earnings can increase their financial situation even if certain benefits stop. So some basic points about work incentives, that basically in both the Title II and SSI programs, work incentives do a few things. First, they can help people keep their cash benefits longer and or at higher levels when they're working. If people earn enough to stop their cash benefits, they can still keep medical benefits with the help of other work incentives. And finally, if people's cash benefits stop because of work, there are other work incentives that can let them get their cash benefits back again without having to reapply, generally much more quickly and easily than reapplying if something happens to their job later, if their earnings later drop low enough, or if they stop working. Now, the Ticket to Work Health Assurance, TWHA program, is a really wonderful work incentive that enables people to get Mo Health Net if they're working, or to continue to receive Mo Health Net, oftentimes at less cost, in particular compared to getting Mo Health Net through a spend down. Or in some cases, it may enable people to remain eligible for Mo Health Net if they otherwise would lose it. So a person can keep Mo Health Net if, for example, they received SSI and their earnings go over the 1619B threshold, or their accountable resources went over the usual limit, $2,000 for an individual or $3,000 for a married couple. And people who would not otherwise be eligible for Mo Health Net, particularly people who get a substantial amount of Social Security disability or Title II benefits and wages, or who might otherwise have to pay large spend downs to get or keep Mo Health Net, may be able to use Ticket to Work health assurance. So most people who are likely to choose, most people who get Title II benefits are most likely going to choose work strategies that will continue their cash benefits. That's especially true for Title II benefits because they're all or nothing. And it's more of a challenge. It's more daunting for people to think about losing their entire benefit than just having it reduced, for example, the way it would be with SSI. If people keep their cash benefits, they keep their medical benefits as well. But some people may be willing to consider working their way off cash benefits if they understand they'll be better off financially and that their medical benefits will continue, even if their cash benefits stop. Now, if a person is willing to consider working their way off cash benefits, especially if they understand that they'll have more money, if they're earning enough from work, they could have more money without cash benefits than if they were earning less and keeping their cash benefits. Then people will certainly want to know that they can keep their medical benefits if they work their way off cash benefits. For people on SSI, it's going to be the 1619B rule that enables them to do that. For people getting Title II benefits who are receiving Medicare, it would be the extended period of Medicare coverage and premium health insurance for the working disabled that would let them keep their Medicare indefinitely if they work their way off Title II cash benefits. You'd also want to focus on work incentives that would protect them and let them get back on cash benefits more quickly and easily without having to reapply if they later stop working or their earnings drop low enough. And those work incentives would be 1619B and possibly expedited reinstatement for people who get SSI. And for people on Title II, it would be the extended period of eligibility and expedited reinstatement. And again, the Ticket to Work Health Assurance, TWHA program, can be really useful in addition to enable people to get Mo Health Net or keep it if they otherwise wouldn't receive it or would have to pay more for it. So let's do a quick exercise just to review. And you want to figure out which one of the following is not a good work incentive strategy. Which one is not a good strategy? A, for people who may work their way off cash benefits, emphasize work incentives that will let them keep their medical benefits and get cash benefits back without reapplying if their earnings later drop or stop. B, focus on helping people always earn little enough to keep their cash benefits. C, emphasize how medical benefits can continue when people work. D, consider Ticket to Work health assurance for working people to get or keep Medicaid or Mo Health Net. Or E, focus on people improving their bottom line rather than keeping all benefits at all costs. And just to let you quickly review these 5 options again. Here they are. And now take a moment to select your answer, A, B, C, D, or E. And the correct answer is B, to focus on helping people always earn little enough to keep their cash benefits. You absolutely don't want to do this. You want to help people focus on improving their financial situation, even if they were to work their way off cash benefits. Now let's talk a bit about the SSI program, its logic, and the related work incentives. So SSI is a benefit that's based on financial need. It's designed to enable people who are eligible to have at least a basic minimum level of income to pay for living expenses, in particular food and shelter. SSI is supposed to supplement other income. So if a person doesn't have any other income, it's logical that they could get up to the maximum SSI benefit. But if they do have other income, it would make sense that they might receive less SSI because they wouldn't need as much SSI to meet that basic need for food and shelter. So the logic of SSI is that it is as other income or other countable income goes up, SSI goes down. But if other countable income goes down, SSI goes up. So you can think of the relationship between SSI and other countable income as being like a balance or a scale, or if you prefer, like a seesaw. As one side goes down, the other goes up, and vice versa. So that logic is very helpful in understanding the SSI work incentives, the student earned income exclusion, impairment-related work expenses, blind work expenses, and the plan to achieve self-support or PASS. Because the work incentives reduce countable income. Countable income goes down. Remember, when one side of the scale goes down, the other side goes up. So as countable income goes down, SSI goes up. By going up, the extra SSI helps to offset out-of-pocket expenses a person pays for using IRWE, BWE, or PASS. But the student earned income exclusion is kind of unique among these 4. It's the only one of the 4 work incentives that doesn't require the person to pay for expenses. Their countable income is reduced simply because they're a student under age 22 who's regularly attending school or a job training course. That alone will reduce their countable earned income and increase their SSI, and in most cases, enable them to keep the full amount of SSI even while working. The other 3 work incentives of these 4, IRWE, BWE, and PASS, do require a person to pay out of pocket for expenses. And those expenses are subtracted from their countable income. And again, that reduces the countable income and therefore increases their SSI. So you can look at IRWE, BWE, and PASS as ways of helping to offset out-of-pocket expenses. When a person pays for out-of-pocket expenses, their SSI goes up, and that helps offset the out-of-pocket expenses. Now, IRWE, impairment-related work expense, typically only offsets half the cost of an expense. For example, if a person pays $200 a month for IRWEs, and they're getting SSI, their SSI will usually increase by $100 a month, half the amount that they're spending. So it's only offsetting about 50% of the cost that they're paying out of pocket. But blind work expenses, BWES, and past expenses, a plan to achieve self-support, can offset up to 100% of the expenses. Doesn't always work out that way, but it can be up to 100%. So if a person is paying $200 a month for BWES or past expenses, their SSI can increase by up to $200 a month, offsetting the expense dollar for dollar. Now, moving on to 1619B, this is a really critical work incentive in the SSI program. This is the work incentive that basically guarantees that a person on SSI has nothing to lose by working full-time, even if they earn enough to reduce their SSI payments to zero. 1619B can be seen as a double work incentive, sort of a double safety net, because it does two things. It enables a person whose earnings go up high enough to reduce their SSI to zero to still keep SSI eligibility. And that does two things. Protects their Mo Health Net, lets them keep Mo Health Net even though their SSI payments have stopped. And if anything happens to their earnings later, if they drop low enough or they stop working, the person can get SSI payments back just by calling Social Security. They don't have to reapply and start over again. And 1619B has no time limit. A person could, for example, work their way off SSI payments this year, and 30 years later, they could stop working. They could still get their SSI payments back just by calling Social Security, because they'd still be eligible for SSI, and they could keep their free Mo Health Net the entire 30 years and continuing into the future. So it's a tremendous work incentive. So one really key point about work in SSI is that a person on SSI is almost always better off financially if they work than if they don't. And the higher their earnings, the higher their net income will be. That's true because although SSI is reduced when a person works, it's reduced by less than half of their earnings. So here's a key point about explaining work incentives to individuals. A lot of people just glaze over with purely verbal explanations. A lot of people are visual learners. A lot of other people just really struggle with numbers. Using too many numbers is not helpful to them. They need to see other visuals besides numbers to help them understand the SSI work incentives. There are four options that you can use. There are graphs in DB 101, particularly in the benefits and work estimator, that can illustrate the impact of work on persons' benefits and, more importantly, on their net income. You could, as an alternative, use bar graphs or comparison charts that you create. But if you're using the benefits and work estimator in DB 101, that's probably the easiest option. And you can always refer people to the videos, the animated videos in DB 101. So bar graphs can be really useful, even for people who like visuals, even for people who don't like numbers very much, because they can ignore the numbers and just look at the size of the bars in their graphs. And you can see, for example, in this graph, that a person not working, getting only SSI, is going to have less money than a person working 20 hours a week, even though their SSI is reduced. You can see they'll have more money working 30 hours a week, even though the SSI is reduced more. And finally, you can see that working 40 hours a week, even though they're earning enough for their SSI to be reduced to 0, they'd still have more money, even without SSI payments. So this can be a powerful visual. Here's an example of using bar graph for somebody using the student earned income exclusion. They can see that they certainly have a lot more money working than not working and using the student earned income exclusion to keep the full SSI benefit. You can see that in column 2. But you'd also need to show them that after they're no longer eligible for the student earned income exclusion because they're no longer a student regularly attending school, or they've turned 22 or older, then they'd still have more money working 20 hours a week than not working at all. You can see they have considerably more money in column 3 than in column 1, but that they will have less money, particularly less SSI, when they're working without the student earned income exclusion than when they're working with it. Because with the student earned income exclusion, they can typically keep the full amount of SSI. If a person on SSI is working and using IRWE, impairment-related work expenses, you can show them that they'll have more money using IRWE than if they were working and not using IRWE. Well, first of all, they can see that they've got only SSI in the first column when they're not working. In the second column, if they're working and they're paying for a $200 work-related expense, but they're not using IRWE, the SSI will be reduced pretty significantly. They will definitely have more money than not working. But if they work the same hours, pay the same $200 expense, and use impairment-related work expenses for that expense, they'll have, in this example, $100 a month more SSI than they would without using IRWE, and their net income would be significantly greater. You can use a similar method for explaining blind work expenses, except now you can see that when a person is paying $200 a month for an expense and it's approved as a blind work expense by Social Security in the third column, they'll get an extra $200 a month of SSI to offset the $200 expense that they pay for out of pocket, dollar for dollar. Now, for people who do like to see the numbers but still want to see something visual, you can use a comparison chart if for some reason you're not using DB 101, which has similar charts. And in this example, you can see that a person not working has the lowest amount of income, just SSI, working 20 hours a week and paying $200 expense but not using IRWE. Their income is substantially higher, but it's higher still if they work 20 hours a week, pay for the $200 expense, and use IRWE, because they'd get more SSI with it. So let's do a quick exercise. What you want to do now is select all of the following statements that are true. A person on SSI is almost always better off financially if they work. B, student earned income exclusion, impairment-related work expenses, blind work expenses, and plan to achieve self-support all require the person to pay for expenses. C, as earnings go up, SSI goes down, but the SSI decreases by less than half the amount of earnings. As earnings go down, SSI goes up. D, 1619B protects Medicaid eligibility, but does not help a person regain SSI if work later stops. E, SEIE, IRWE, BWE, and PASS enable a person to get higher SSI payments than they would otherwise receive. And F, visual aids such as videos and graphs on DB101, bar graphs, and comparison charts can help individuals understand the impact of earnings on their SSI. So just quickly, so you can review these 6 again, you want to select all of the statements that are true. Okay, now let's look at answers. The correct answers are A, a person on SSI is almost always better off financially if they work. C, as earnings go up, SSI goes down, but the SSI decreases by less than half the amount of earnings. And as earnings go down, SSI goes up. E, SEIE, IRWE, BWE, and PASS enable a person to get higher SSI payments than they would otherwise receive. And F, visual aids such as videos and graphs on DB101, bar graphs, and comparison charts can help individuals understand the impact of earnings on their SSI. Let's move on to Title II and work incentives. So Title II is very different from SSI because Title II benefits are all or nothing. A person receives the full benefit or zero. That's in contrast to SSI, where benefit amounts can fluctuate up or down as other income goes up or down. As a result of this all or nothing feature of Title II benefits, most people who get Title II are going to be very hesitant about earning enough to reduce their cash benefits to zero. Because while someone on SSI could see their SSI gradually going down as their earnings went up, a person on Title II benefits, such as SSDI, will see that their earnings can go up to a certain amount for a certain period of time, and they can keep the full Title II benefit. But if they earn any more than that for a long enough period, the Title II benefit will stop and actually go down to zero rather than just being reduced partially. So most people on Title II benefits, at least initially, are going to choose earnings that'll be below SGA so they can keep their Title II cash benefits. But one important strategy to use is to show people that they can earn more than the SGA dollar amount, but have their countable earnings be below SGA with the help of IRWES and subsidies and sometimes unsuccessful work attempts. So if they are earning or could earn more than $1,260 a month in 2020, more than the SGA dollar amount, or if they're blind, if they meet Social Security's definition of statutory blindness, they could earn more than the blind SGA amount of $2,110 a month, but still not be doing SGA with the help of these work incentives. So the logic of IRWES and subsidies is that they're used as deductions from earnings to help a person's earnings be adjusted so that they more accurately reflect the person's productivity. because Social Security, when they're figuring out if a person is doing SGA, is only supposed to consider the amount of the person's earnings that do reflect their actual productivity. So the IRWES and subsidies are subtractions from earnings to adjust those earnings so that the difference, the countable amount that remains, is a more accurate reflection of the person's productivity. Just a little refresher about IRWES, impairment-related work expenses. These are expenses that meet 4 conditions. The person pays for them out of pocket and is not reimbursed. They are related to the person's disability of record that they're getting Title II benefits for, or to another condition they have that's being treated by a licensed healthcare provider. They're needed at least partly for work, although an IRWE could be an expense that a person might need outside of work as well. And they're of reasonable cost. The person's paying no more than the market rate for the expense. Subsidies are circumstances in which the person is paid the full wage for their job, but they're technically not earning the full amount, either because they're getting extra help or supervision to do the job, or their productivity is lower than non-disabled workers working in the same job because of their disability. Either maybe they're working more slowly than their coworkers, or they're not able to fully perform all of the regular duties of the job, but they're paid the full wage for their job, so they're not technically earning all that they're paid. So IRWES and subsidies are simply subtracted from gross wages, and if the difference, which is their countable income, is below the SGA dollar amount, $1,260 a month for non-blind people and $2,110 a month for blind people in 2020, then Social Security will most likely decide that they're not doing SGA and their cash benefits can continue. So let's go through a quick example. Here's Mustafa, who gets $1,060 a month SSDI. He used up his trial work period 5 years ago, and he's not blind, so his SGA level would be $1,260 a month. He starts a job working 40 hours a week, earning $10 an hour. That averages out to about $1,732 a month gross wages. So that's well over the $1,260 a month SGA level for a non-blind person. But Mustafa has some potential work incentives here. He pays $120 a month for therapy copays and $10 a month for prescription copays. And if we could make the case that he needs therapy and prescriptions in order to be able to work, then these could be allowed as IRWES. He also has a job coach who helps him 20 hours a month with his job tasks. And Mustafa is paid the full wage for his job, but his employer estimates that he works at about 90% productivity. In other words, he's paid 100% of the wage, but he's technically only earning 90% of it. So he's not technically earning the other 10% of his wage, and that would be a subsidy. So Mustafa has 2 IRWES, the $120 copays for therapy and the $10 copays for prescriptions each month. That's total IRWES of $130 a month. He also has subsidies. He's getting extra help to do the job, and he's getting 20 hours a month of that extra help. We multiply that by Mustafa's $10 an hour wage, and that equals $200 a month. Because he's getting extra help, Social Security's logic is, well, somebody else is doing some of his work, is actually earning some of that money for him. And the value of the work that's done in those 20 hours that he's getting extra help would be based on Mustafa's $10 an hour wage. So the value of the subsidy for the extra help that he's getting is $200 a month. And finally, he's getting a subsidy for reduced productivity. We figured he was paid 100% of the wage. He was only earning 90% of it. That means 10% of what he's paid, he's not technically earning himself. And 10% of his $1,732 a month average gross wage would work out to $173 and slightly more in change. So the SGA determination would start with his gross wages, subtract his IRWES, the subsidy for extra help, and the subsidy for reduced productivity. And after those subtractions, the difference, his countable wages, would be $1,229 a month. Since that's below the SGA level for a non-blind person in 2020, below $1,260 a month, Social Security will most likely determine that Mustafa is not performing SGA, and his SSDI payments would continue. How about explaining Title II work incentives to visual learners and people who struggle with numbers? Well, you can use the same strategies that you would use for someone getting SSI. The graphs in the DB101 Benefits and Work Estimator. You can use bar graphs or comparison charts if for some reason you're not using DB101. And you can refer people to the animated videos in DB101. So using bar graphs, or the graphs that are built into the DB101 Benefits and Work Estimator, you would see for Mustafa that when he's not working, he's getting only SSDI. And when he's working in this example, in which he was able to use IRWES and subsidies to keep his countable earnings below SGA, so he'd keep his SSDI, then he'd get his full SSDI payment and his gross wages. And he'd obviously have much more income than not working. We should also talk a little bit about unsuccessful work attempts. This is a less well-known Title II work incentive, and it's very helpful for a person who may start in a job, may be actually doing SGA, their countable earnings, even after using IRWES and subsidies, are clearly at or above the SGA level. But within 6 months, the person either stops work or their earnings drop below SGA, their countable earnings fall below SGA for disability-related reasons, or because special conditions or accommodations they had were removed. Now, Social Security decides that a work effort of less than 6 months was an unsuccessful work attempt, then they won't count that period of work as SGA, even though the person's earnings were clearly at or above the SGA level during that work attempt. Because they'll say, well, yeah, you were doing SGA, but the job didn't work out, or your earnings dropped below SGA because of your disability within 6 months. So we're not going to count it at all, and we won't count your earnings during that period of work as SGA. Now, one key detail about an unsuccessful work attempt is that you can use unsuccessful work attempts Anytime a person's working, working less than, no more than 6 months, and has their earnings drop below SGA or stop for disability-related reasons, as long as Social Security approves. But if a person, in spite of all the work incentives available to them, the IRWES, the subsidies, the unsuccessful work attempts, if a person still does SGA at some point after their trial work period, in spite of using all the work incentives, then they will no longer be allowed to use unsuccessful work attempts after that. On the other hand, subsidies and IRWES, a person could continue to use when Social Security is determining if they're doing SGA later, but they could no longer use unsuccessful work attempts after that first SGA month following the trial work period. And that first SGA month, in spite of the work incentives, is known as a cessation month. So here's an exercise involving Title II work incentives. You want to pick the one statement out of the following that is true. Only one is true. A, IRWES, subsidies, and unsuccessful work attempts help a person keep Title II if their earnings are below $1,260 a month or below $2,110 a month if they're blind. B, Title II benefits are reduced as earnings increase. C, the visual aids to help people understand the impact of earnings on Title II benefits are very different from the visual aids used to explain the impact of earnings on SSI. Or D, an unsuccessful work attempt may exist if a person performed SGA but lost the job or had earnings drop below SGA within 6 months for disability-related reasons. Give you one more look at these 4 options. Again, you want to pick the one statement that's true. And now let's look at the answer. The correct answer is D. An unsuccessful work attempt may exist if a person performed SGA but lost the job or had earnings drop below SGA within 6 months for disability-related reasons. And now let's talk about working off Title II benefits. So as we've said before, most people who get Title II benefits are going to choose strategies to keep their earnings below SGA, possibly with the help of IRWES, subsidies, and maybe unsuccessful work attempts, so that their Title II benefits will continue rather than being reduced to zero. But it's also true that everyone who gets Title II benefits can be better off financially working full-time without Title II benefits than working below SGA and keeping Title II benefits if they're able to earn enough from work. So let's look at an example. So here's Samantha, who gets $920 a month of SSDI. She starts a job earning $17 an hour, and initially she works 15 hours a week. And she's doing that precisely so that she can keep her earnings below SGA and keep her SSDI benefit. With $17 an hour gross wages, earning 15 hours a week of wages, If you multiply that by 4.33 weeks per month, the average number of weeks in a month, you'll see that her gross wages would be $1,104 a month, which is below the $1,260 a month SGA level in 2020 for a non-blind person. So Samantha's clearly choosing an earnings goal that would keep her earnings below SGA and enable her to keep the full SSDI benefit. But suppose you, her benefit planner, help her consider what would happen if she worked 40 hours a week full-time in the same job, making $17 an hour. In that case, her average gross wages would be $2,944 a month. So she'd clearly be doing SGA unless she had a mammoth amount of IRWES and subsidies. And her SSDI would be suspended after her trial work period and grace period had ended. But let's take a look using a bar graph at a comparison of her net income. Now, when she's not working and getting only SSDI, she'd clearly have the lowest income of all three of these columns. And that's shown in column 1. Column 2 shows her current earnings and SSDI benefit with $980 a month of gross wages. She would keep her SSDI of $920 a month. With full-time earnings, working 40 hours a week at $17 an hour, her net income would be significantly greater, even though her SSDI benefit would stop. You could also use a comparison chart to show Samantha's net income working 15 hours a week compared to working 40 hours a week. And you'll notice we've also included the impact of her income taxes on her net income here. Now, there are a variety of reasons that Samantha might not choose to work full-time, even if she can see from the examples you gave her that she would have substantially more money. She might be just too fearful of having her SSDI stop. She might just be really uncertain about how stable her new job is, whether she could continue working. She might even doubt that it would be worth it for her to work full-time rather than part-time if her net income would increase by less than $500 a month. But there are some compelling reasons that she might choose to work full-time, even though her SSDI benefit would stop. And those would be, she'd see that her net income would be significantly higher working full-time than working part-time, even though her SSDI would stop. She might like the idea of being less dependent on SSDI. Some people do. She might really like the idea of not having to deal with Social Security as much as if she were still receiving SSDI. She might like the idea of working more and possibly increasing the Social Security retirement benefit that she'll one day qualify for. She might like the independence, feeling of productivity and enjoyment that she'd get working full-time rather than working only 15 hours a week. She might feel like her health could improve. Work as treatment is a common theme in the behavioral health field. That by working, people's mental health or physical health can actually improve in many cases. And she may be aware of the work incentives that would protect her Medicare, even if her SSDI stopped due to earnings, and other work incentives that would let her get SSDI payments back more quickly and easily than if she had to reapply if her earnings later dropped low enough below the SGA level or if she stopped working. So the choice would be hers. But there are some compelling reasons she might choose to work full-time. So it's always a good idea if you work with someone who gets Title II benefits and they're not just panicked about the possibility of their Title II benefits stopping. It's always a good idea to show them a full-time work option that would make them better off without Title II benefits than if they kept their earnings below SGA and kept Title II. You're not pressuring the person to work full-time, but just showing them that they could be better off, even if they did SGA and their benefits stopped. You're simply planting seeds so that a person might consider it, if not now, maybe in the future. Now, some people who get Title II benefits, if they understood that they could be better off working their way off Title II benefits, might select higher earnings goals, might say, well, I think maybe I'd like to earn more per hour and work full-time because I could have more money even without SSDI. So I think I'm going to shoot for a higher hourly wage. I'm going to look for a better job. You can find a lot more detail about this in another webinar called Why on Earth Should I Work My Way Off SSDI? So let's do a quick exercise involving this. Here's Francine, who gets SSDI and keeps her earnings below $1,260 a month, below the SGA dollar amount, to be sure she keeps her SSDI. She tells you she would like to work full-time, but she's been told she can't, or else she'll lose her SSDI. Which one of the following actions should you take? A, tell Francine you understand her concern about losing SSDI and support her decision to not consider full-time earnings. B, show Francine an example of full-time earnings that would give her more net income even after her SSDI had stopped than she has now, keeping her earnings below SGA and keeping SSDI. Tell her the choice is hers, whether to work part-time or full-time, but explain you want her to know she could have more money in a full-time job. C, review IRWES and subsidies with Francine to see if she might be able to work more hours while still keeping her earnings below SGA. Tell her it appears she could work more hours, but not full-time. And which of these three options would you think would be the best to take? Again, reviewing A, B, and C. Take a moment to select your answer. And the correct answer is B. Show Francine an example of full-time earnings that would give her more net income even after her SSDI had stopped than she has now, keeping earnings below SGA and keeping SSDI. And tell her the choice is hers, whether to work part-time or full-time, but you just want her to know that she could have more money in a full-time job, even if her SSDI stops. So finally, you want to remember your role regarding work incentives as a benefit navigator or benefit planner. You want to explain the basic impact of work on benefits and highlight how work incentives help protect benefits and make sure people are better off working than not working. You need to be able to explain work incentives clearly and understandably to people by showing them the logic of work incentives, focusing on their individual situation, how the work incentives would affect them, rather than just showing the general ideas of work incentives. You want to use visual aids when it's appropriate to focus on the bottom line rather than just protecting all benefits at all costs. You could highlight success stories of other people when appropriate and use DB101 estimators, especially the benefits and work estimator. You can get more information about that by checking out the webinar called Using DB101 Effectively with Customers. So specifically, what do benefit navigators and benefit planners do regarding work incentives? A benefit navigator provides basic explanations of work incentives using DB101 when possible. A benefit planner provides more detailed and person-specific explanations of the work incentives and should always use DB101 when possible. A benefit navigator is going to refer a person who's considering work to a benefit planner or a CWIC for more detailed advisement about the impact of work on benefits and using work incentives. A benefit planner will refer a person to or collaborate with a CWIC if the person wants to use those specialized work incentives, those that are not automatic, such as IRWES subsidy, student earned income exclusion, blind work expense, or PASS, plan to achieve self-support. So in conclusion, some tips for explaining work incentives are to keep it simple, logical, focus on the person's own situation, use visuals when appropriate, videos on DB101, bar graphs or comparison charts, or the charts built into DB101. To focus on the bottom line, not just keeping all benefits at all costs, and highlight success stories of how other people may have used work incentives, of course, without breaching confidentiality. And that concludes the Tips for Explaining Work Incentives webinar. Thank you very much for participating.